All right, so a couple times now this year, I have reviewed highly anticipated prog albums. Dream Theater and Steven Wilson come to mind as two of the biggest, if not really the two biggest, just to be honest. Today I bring you another highly anticipated album, perhaps, arguably, even more highly anticipated than those two. But not necessarily prog? Maybe? Well, at least as far as some people think. So here it is. My review of the latest opus from Sleep Token, and my thoughts on whether or not they can be considered as prog metal. Coming right up. Hey Prog Noggins, Dave here, and this is Bleeding Edge with your weekly progressive rock album review. So yes, I said this is likely the biggest album I've reviewed so far this year, and I think it's probably likely to stay that way unless something unforeseen happens. And I know, the prog fans out there were screaming sacrilege already when I mentioned in the intro that big titans like Dream Theater and Steven Wilson already dropped albums this year. So, bigger than them? Well, yeah, I think so. Those two might be two of the biggest names in prog, but neither of them debuted a #1 album in 7 countries. So there's that. Sleep Token is undeniably a phenomenon at this point in time. And arguably, if they are considered prog, they may be the biggest prog band in the world. They're selling out big albums. They are putting out big tours. They are putting out platinum-selling albums. I'm not sure who else is doing that at this point in time. Closest I can think of, at least in terms of concert sales, would be Tool. But it's been a minute or two since they put out an album. So anyway, as always, I like to go over the specifics of the album, the details. 10 tracks, 56 minutes, if I've got my number correct. The album is produced by Carl Brown, not a name I'm familiar with particularly. I don't know that he's traveled much in prog circles, and to listen to this album, yeah, that sounds about right. And there's someone named Gabby Rose providing guest saxophone. Other than that, it's kind of hard to really talk about the band members because technically they remain anonymous, I think. Honestly, I'm kind of foggy on that at the moment. There's Vessel, the lead singer, and there are some other musicians named for Roman numerals. Vessel's identity might have been revealed, or not, or it was. I don't know. I don't feel like anybody's fully committed with the idea that the name that was floated out there as being him, and I even read history about it, is the same dude or not. I'm just not sure. Like it's back and forth in my mind. Maybe it's a done deal. I don't know. Maybe it's still a mystery. I don't know. Do I have time for it? I don't care. I don't like. There's your shtick. You want to be anonymous. You want to do a ghost thing, or whatever. Knock yourselves out. I couldn't care less. Anyway, so talking about the album in brief, I'm not exactly clear if this is a concept album. I know there's an overall concept about the band. And I've heard the first 3 albums described as a trilogy. I've not had the time or inclination in the past to dig deep enough into it to find out if that's exactly what it is. And if we're talking trilogy, it sounds like a narrative concept spread over 3 albums. Maybe this is continuing it. I don't know. I know it deals with themes of fame and conflicted relationships and death and loss and the paradox of struggles in paradise, as evidenced by the title of the album. All right, so let's dive in. But before we do, quick moment to call attention to the fact that Bleeding Edge and the Expanse now have merch. Pretty cool. T-shirts, hoodies, stickers, other goodies are available at the link in the description. So hey, you want to spruce up your fashion a little bit? Go check it out. I hope you like them. Enjoy. Meanwhile, also, the methodology behind my madness. I score the album on a scale of 1 to 5 in 4 dimensions: intellectual, innovation, technical, and emotional. And then I might add or I might subtract a personal enjoyment modifier if the objective numbers don't quite match my subjective experience of the album. So here we are. Let's dive in. As always, we start with intellectual. The lyrics are really, really creative in so many parts of this album. The turn of phrase, the use of simile. They do like their similes. They seem overall to be very personal, a lot of expression of vulnerability and doubt and fears of toxic relationships, an unabashed love for one another, and the price of fame. These are very nicely expressed, both in terms of the creativeness of the writing and mostly, not always for me, the clarity of the intellect behind them. But there's some really good stuff here. They do a really nice job confronting the pros and cons of sudden fame and the toll of maintaining an anonymous identity in the face of that. I noted that somewhere along the line, someone I read described the first 3 albums as a trilogy. I really don't know if that was just meant to talk about 3 albums as a group and kind of misusing the word trilogy, or if there actually was a story going on. Like I said, I know there is a history, a mythos created around the band, and so maybe that was part of it. I'm not sure. I don't know if this one is even meant in itself to be a narrative concept album, or even if it's intended as a thematic concept album. But the overall themes are pretty clear, and there does seem to be a good bit of connective tissue between them. But I'm just not sure how this was intended to be put together. I get the impression it's a pretty methodical band, and they approach things with a lot of intention. So, no, but I'll tell you what, there are no slouches writing the lyrics here. And I don't know if that's all Vessel. I get the impression it is, but I'm not sure. But good stuff here. Rated it a 4. I could be convinced to go to a 5 the more I learn about this, but I've tried really hard in the course of making my own impression of this and putting my own review together to avoid reviews and to avoid any other things out there that might influence me. So I have not read, but I do get the impression there is a lot of analysis going on with this album and some pretty positive reactions. Anyway, I give it a 4. Maybe someday I'll increase that to a 5. On innovation. Frankly, for me, the greatest innovation this band had was in their original album and the original conception of the band. Not so much the mythos. Again, I don't care for all the theatrical stuff, whatever. But really more just the idea of what they are as a band. And I think they really did a great job with that in Take Me Back to Eden, where they evolved it into this kind of R&B post-metal dichotomy. And I use the term post-metal because yeah, I agree that they fit in a metal category, but this is not your traditional riff-oriented metal. This is something that's more based, I think, in ambiance, but then also these grand pounding crescendos. It is not traditional metal by any stretch, and I think that's where the post-metal label fits pretty well, at least in my mind. But I think their original concept of the band, this dichotomy of soft and beautiful and sometimes ambient music mixed in with these crushing metal riffs and chords. It's always was kind of a nice back and forth there, and at times they would stay a little bit in between, but they really have made a career out of the serious swings from one extreme to the other that a lot of bands don't do very well. And it also was one of the things I liked about progressive rock was the fact that you could have these big, huge moments like orchestral in nature or whatever you want to say, just in-your-face stuff, and then they can switch off to this nice, peaceful, pastoral thing with acoustic guitars or something like that, and those switches back and forth and changes in time signatures and all that, I always really dug. These guys do that pretty well. Now, this one, they did evolve a bit further down the direction of hip-hop and R&B than they had in previous albums. First 2 albums, and I took the time to go back and listen to the first 3 albums again to reacquaint myself. I'll be honest, the first 2 albums I dabbled more, and I listened to a bunch of singles without listening to the full albums. Mostly a time thing, because I only have so much time in the world. So I was very familiar with them, and I will say I go back to the very beginning with them. I was playing them back on Bleeding Edge when it was a radio show, and they first came out on Sundowning. So been there from the beginning. But they've gradually evolved more and more towards the R&B things. First really hitting that mold with Take Me Back to Eden, but this time around taking it even further and leaning much more into that, including things like sections that, again, I'd go back to my reaction to Emergence when it first came out. It's not quite rapped, but it kind of is. And to be honest with you, the way the lyrics are put together and the way they're done, I don't think they were freestyled in the studio or anything like that. But I think they have that origin there, that just appeal for me in all my deep expertise in freestyle rapping. But that's what I'm hearing and that's what I'm thinking. Don't know if that's the case or not. Don't know if we'll ever find out. These guys are so damn mysterious. Otherwise, they haven't deviated that far from their established blend of sounds and genres. And they're just kind of the only ones really mining the territory the way they are at this point in time. They are a band that is truly, at this point, unique. And I've always said I love a unique voice in that sense, and a unique sound or style. The bands that can really create their own niche are the ones that oftentimes really impress me. And these guys are absolutely deep in their own niche. And I appreciate their uninhibited use of other diverse instruments this time around, whether it's adding in some strings or adding in some saxophone. I always love some sax in my prog. Record scratching and programmed drums. At least they sound like programmed drums to me. And the credits in there indicate somebody did some drum programming. So I think I'm on the right track there. So that kind of stuff that they bring together here is pretty cool. So this one does feel like a bit of growth, and it's not a huge step forward, but it's still them evolving their sound, not sitting on their laurels. Whether or not the direction they chose is necessarily positive or negative is going to be obviously up to the individual listener. And a little natural progression is you know, a good thing in my mind, even if it's not always in the direction that some may have wanted. For me, I'm giving them a 4 on this one. They could have sat on their laurels and just redid Take Me Back to Eden, but they didn't. They did something a little bit different this time around. Looking at the technical side now. Hard to grade this one for me, because I really believe that their approach to music is meant to be done so very intentionally and with a lot of precision. And it is played in that way with efficiency and precision, almost at times like, to a degree, like it's a metronome. It is that regular. It is that predictable. There's no sloppiness that I hear in the music. And some of that may be, hey, if they program some drums, it's hard to get sloppy. I do hear some human elements in there as well, though, but they are really not making music that's meant to be cluttered with a lot of overly complex arrangements, not necessarily always a lot of layered instruments. There's a lot of pieces in here where the instrumentation is pretty sparse, and they might layer on some more and more as it goes, but they aren't all over the place. They are very focused. And while there are some points here and there where the arrangements get a bit more complex, there's also not a lot of room for improvisation or soloing, so you don't get a lot of that stuff. And that's often where one gets a bit of an idea of the full capabilities of musicians when they are doing that. Not always, but oftentimes. At least that, for me, being the non-musician myself. But I'm not sure. There are times when I feel that the drums, again, were almost a little too precise to be anything but machines, anything but programmed. And again, album credits suggest to me I'm right about that. But there are other times, certainly, I'm hearing it with the imperfection of a human being playing. And it's pretty deft stuff a lot of times that they pull out there. The drummer, I think, to me, is probably, as a musician, the highlight person in there, because that's the person that who's just, I felt, drawing my attention more than the other instruments. Piano's in there pretty good. The guitars are, for me, a bit simplified. That may be me saying it based on the perspective of someone who doesn't play, but I think the chords are more about pounding than they are about doing a lot of different things and jumping around from technique to technique and style to style. They do what they're there to do. It's the drums for me that stood out a good bit, and that's saying a bit, because I tend to focus on drums, and oftentimes they don't get the attention in a lot of music that I listen to that I might like them to, in favor of keyboards and guitars and singers and all that. This one also shows off more in the production, I think, and the composition with that precision. It makes great use of atmospherics and sometimes effects here and there. The sound is really expansive and very dramatic at times, and that fits what they're trying to do, I believe. This is written to be dramatic stuff. So when the music gets that way, when it gets those big dramatic crescendos, that's absolutely in service to what they're trying to do. And it's impressive that way. So in a certain sense, in my brain, like the best parts of this album that I hear musically, I will question a little bit whether that's more about the production than the playing and the musicianship. And sometimes that can rub me a little bit wrong that way. I don't mean to rub wrong the people playing or anything like that. They did some great stuff. And it's not exactly where I would say top notch, but I don't know that it's meant to be that kind of impressive. It's meant to be dramatic and emotional, not show-offy. But it takes a good bit of talent to do what they're doing. So I gave this one a 4 as well. Finally, we get to emotional, and we know we've got a trend here. Honestly, in many ways, I'm back and forth with this one. This has been a challenging album for me to really decide what I think. I found it hard overall to invest much of my own emotion in this one in a lot of ways. The crescendos in the music, which is usually where I get it, often felt more obligatory and manufactured than in the previous albums. They didn't feel as creative. And so there's a sense in my mind like I don't know, maybe their hearts aren't as much in that part of this album as it was something they did because they felt obligated to do so, because that's the sound, rather than go full R&B and soft kind of music. They thought, well, we still got to throw these in here, so they put them on there. Maybe. At other times they didn't. It varied from song to song for me. And there's other things we'll get into in a little bit here. But there's even a couple lines in the lyrics that, for me, might suggest that the writer was getting a little over it himself. Suggesting the chords are boring, things like that. So, I don't know. Maybe to a degree their heart wasn't into it as much this time. Maybe they felt like they wanted to make a more R&B type music on this particular album, and therefore that stuff was kind of tacked on out of a sense of, well, we got to do this because we're Sleep Token and that's what we do. A little fear of going too far away from their established sound. I don't know. It's hard to say. There's so many things in my mind that not only in the mythos and the anonymity, I can say the word, the anonymity of the band members, not that mysteriousness, but there's certain mystery in how the lyrics were written. Again, we'll get into that. Overall, the music is very pretty at times and very cinematic. And then, of course, can be immediately afterwards bludgeoning, just as they do. But I think it got a little predictable and felt a bit packaged in this one, more so than I felt like on the other ones, which for me deadens the emotion part of it. And again, like I said, I've got conflicted feelings about this. I feel the emotion was better communicated in the lyrics than it was in the music in this point around. And there were times the lyrics I really did find were kind of moving and very insightful and very in-depth. I dug that. But in the end, right now, I am still very much on the fence in many aspects of this album. So I'm giving it a 3 on the emotion. That's nothing new for me. If you've been around, you know what I'm doing. More to come on that, though, down the road. We'll see how things may change by the end of the year. So right now, that gives us 4 for intellectual, a 4 for innovation, and a 4 for technical, a 3 for emotional. The raw score from that is 3.75, which actually ranks pretty high in the albums I have reviewed this year. I have not decided with this system if I am a tough reviewer or not. I might be, because nobody's getting much at 4 or above. It happens. Now, additional thoughts on here, and I'm going to do my best not to ramble, but I feel like this album has invited it in me. As I mentioned, man, they love their similes. They go back to that lyrical motif over and over and over again. Not really a criticism and not really praising. I'm just making note of it. I just happened to notice somewhere along the line there's a lot of things that are like a lot of things in the album. One of the things that I did find annoying, every single song on this 10-song album, every one of them, all 10, start out quiet. Every one. And that gets a little repetitive when you keep hearing that over and over. And for me, the repetition gets a little annoying. I wished at times from on occasion they would come out the gate full bore. Punch us in the mouth with some chords right away. Do something fast. They tend to use the same tempo for most every single song. except for maybe a couple of sections here and there, but everything's got pretty much the same tempo, and my brain is looking for more variety across the course of an album. When things get repetitious over the course of an album, it can make the album seem a little tedious at times. I had that problem a little bit with the back and forth between the soft and the loud on Take Me Back to Eden. Not so much that it really bothered me or I disliked it very much, but it did keep it out of my top 20. So, and another tendency I noticed in the writing is repeating lines over and over. And not just repeating lines over and over, but like repeating them to the point that it gets a little annoying. It's a bit of a writing idiosyncrasy, and I don't know that I picked up on it on the previous albums because I didn't look as closely at the lyrics as I did on this one. But it was noticeable. I made comment about it in my reaction to Emergence. He does it in other parts of this album. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's just... I don't know. Editing, guys. We could chop a bar or two off right about there. That's all I'm saying. Overall, the concept of them leaning more and more into the R&B pool and adding rapping to the pastiche of styles that they involve. I miss them being heavier a little more often, though I think my dabbling in them gave me a little bit of an incorrect impression as well, because as I went back and listened to the older two albums that I didn't know as well as the last two, that was always there a bit. There was always a lot of soft, quiet songs mixed in with these songs that contain the bludgeoning riffs. So that's a problem with my expectation. And that I expected a little more heaviness, but I still feel that this album dialed back the heaviness a bit than certainly Take Me Back to Eden, and I think to a large extent the albums before it. It's maybe not as big as I thought it was, but nonetheless I can't deny it's there. So, it's a thing there that I'm up and down with. The problem is I'm not really someone who's big into R&B and to an even lesser degree into hip hop. It's just not something that I necessarily enjoy. I have to be in the right mood. And when an album goes that far into it, and at times there are points where it's like cloyingly poppy. I'm looking at you, Past Self. It's very poppy in the terms of pop music. And like I'm not spending a lot of time listening to Taylor Swift. She may be a great writer. She may be a great artist. Not my thing. And if you drift more into that pop realm, you're going to lose me a bit. It's just the way it is. So what I really got into, I think, at a certain point, too, in particular, was the very personal, heartfelt lyrics that were in this. In a lot of ways, they were intriguing to me. And probably more so than they would be if I don't know, if more so than they would be if I knew the full backstory and everything. I don't know. Like I said, I know that there is this whole mythos built around the deity called sleep, and Vessel functions as like some sort of avatar of sleep in some way, shape, or form, leading people to worship. I see that kind of stuff in their social media posts and everything. So again, first three albums were a trilogy. I don't know. As in a story, I don't know. Is it over? Is this a continuation of that story? Is it the next chapter of that story? Is it a fresh start and a new story? Or is it some sort of transitional piece between stories, and that this album was taken out of the context of a story and is more a personal reflection of the writer, that being Vessel, I assume. Not 100% sure, but I kind of think. Somewhere along the line, a real name has been dropped for him because I'm not sure who it is. I didn't care to write it down. It may not even matter. But I came out of this album with about 3 different interpretations of the overall arc of the lyrics within the album. And one was that idea of a continuation of a story. And there were certain parts of the first couple of songs, at least in the album, that gave me the idea, like, wait, is this a story about Vessel starting to question his devotion to sleep, starting to feel used and not valued necessarily, just used as a tool and kind of thrown away, and thinking of getting out, thinking of breaking away from sleep? I don't know. It's an interesting angle of the story, especially when I don't know what the rest of the story was saying exactly. But in my mind, it makes a lot of sense. You guys should write that. Maybe that's it. I don't know. At the same time, I started reading a lot of the other lyrics and seeing expressions of various aspects of romantic relationships, everything from early infatuation to deep, deep love to toxic relationships to unrequited love. Like, it's all there, and a lot of it is very much on the sleeve. And especially when you talk about a song like Gethsemane, and like, there's pain in those lyrics. Like, that's somebody somewhere who is recognizing that the person he loves is not good for him, and at the same time not being able to give up his devotion. There's a lot of very confessional aspects to the lyrics in here that I feel like is very much the writer bearing his soul in particular, and perhaps stepping outside of the story and stepping outside of the character of Vessel to a degree. I don't know. And that's the other part, that maybe the personal nature of this and maybe the mixing of story elements and personal elements and all that, I don't know. Maybe the individual known as Vessel, whatever his real name is starting to ruminate on this character that he has become through Vessel, and how this sudden fame has created this dynamic where he is feeling trapped by the money and the expectations and the fans and what he's created, and now to a degree, I don't know, starting to want to have thoughts of escaping this creation of his, starting to feel trapped within it and unable to escape, even if maybe he is feeling that the chords are boring and this is no longer exactly what he wants to do. That's the sense of feeling like the pounding metal chords are not quite as heartfelt as they have been in the past. That maybe to a degree, you know what, he's scratched the metal itch that he had. It's expected to get out of this by now, but now feels stuck because, oh my God, they've grown into this huge thing and it's gotten away from him to a degree, and he's, I don't know. At the same time, a song like Caramel says he wants to ride this wave as far as he can ride it and enjoy it as much as he can, but all of that angle gives me strains of something like Stephen King's The Dark Half, and if you're not familiar with that novel, it's an author who creates a pseudonym that he used in the past to get started and then ditched him and actually wrote a thing like he died and killed him off, and somehow the character actually comes to life and tries to take over his life. A little bit there in this from what I'm hearing. So, the whole concept of your character, your pseudonym, starting to take over your real life to a degree. So I'm hearing that in there, and I think some of the few things I did read quickly either match reality or match other people's speculations about it. I'm not sure about that at this point in time, but overall, like, there's so much of this feeling of confessional and the sense of vulnerability that is really rarely heard in almost any form of metal music. That's pretty cool, pretty impressive, and it's certainly rife with material for analysis and makes it very intriguing that way. So the album overall is very intriguing, and it's very well written and very well respected, which to me lends credence to the idea that this is not just somebody writing a character. This is not somebody just writing to write, but somebody expressing their own deep, heartfelt feelings about something. So I don't know. And I could be completely and utterly full of shit right now, and all of this intrigue is self-generated on my part. But I have a sense it's not. And overall, it's still, nonetheless, a pretty fascinating character examination. For me, again, as mentioned, standout tracks. Gethsemane, really enjoyed the midsection break that brought out what I initially was describing in my mind as jazzy, jangly guitar until I heard it again, and all of a sudden it hit me. I'm like, oh, wait, this is reminding me of Polyphia or Pliny. That kind of cool stuff. And almost I was expecting to see that they had guessed it on the album, but nope, no mention. Neither one of them. All right. But it absolutely called that to mind. And for me, 9 songs into the album, that was the most unique sound I was hearing and the most unique style. And I think the first time they picked up the pace just a little bit, and I enjoyed that. That part made it stand out for me. And so it was the most unique sounding song on the album. And overall, the melody itself is sweet, and the lyrics and how they depict unrequited love and the idea of how painful that can be. And yet at the same time, that object of the unrequited love can still be difficult to let go of. I speak from experience, to be honest. Next other song I really like is Look to Windward, that starts it off. Really, to me, the song I feel like has a lot of variety in it, and it just feels because it has like almost these 4, maybe even 5 very distinct sections to it which helps to avoid that sense of repetition. Because again, so many of these songs, soft and build and boom, 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 maybe a little quiet in there, then boom, 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 and boom. Repeat. Happened a lot. So that's where I thought this one, it kind of fit that because every single song started off slow. But I felt like it had a little bit more variety to it than a lot of the other ones. And I also quite enjoyed Infinite Baths, the album closer. I'm a little weirded out by at one point in time the screaming turns into a... I'm like, okay, that sounds unpleasant. I feel like I've heard that somewhere before. Anyway, I found it a little bit strange. I will be perfectly honest. When I first listened to this album, the very first time, I honest to God found it tedious. It seemed like a slog to get through the whole thing. It seemed to take forever. And it's weird because I think mostly it's because I was so focused solely on the album and the lyrics at that time. I don't always necessarily read lyrics the first time I hear an album. In this case, I did for no other reason than I did. Chaos theory in practice. And I think it maybe highlighted some of the frustrating repetitive tendencies in the writing. And meanwhile, some subsequent listens helped me warm up to it a bit. And I don't know if it's because on those later listens, I wasn't 100% totally focused on it and what was happening at any given moment. It was more along the lines of I was hearing it more as a whole and kind of flowing with the music as it was. It seems like a kind of an odd dynamic, but not necessarily one I've never heard of before. So in that sense, I warmed up to it a good bit. And I can't say that I find it so tedious right now. I just don't know that it's necessarily the style for me. So like I said, this one's been a tough one for me. I cannot in any way, shape, or form deny the talent involved. And at the same time, I can't say that I completely enjoy the direction they've chosen. But there are parts of it that undeniably have stuck in my head, and I found myself coming back to them as I went about my business today. So, catchy music, something that's an earworm, sometimes that can make an album grow on a person. So we'll see where it goes. Plus, as I mentioned, I find all the subtext in the lyrics quite ripe for analysis. So in the end, that said, I feel the style pulls just a bit away from the overall experience for me, and I'm going to apply an enjoyment modifier of negative 0.25. That takes, for me, the final score down to 3.5. Even with the modifier, though, if you've been paying attention and tracking, this album still ranks pretty solidly with the others I've reviewed this year. So this is by no means me putting the album down. Just saying I wish in many ways I could have liked it a little bit better. Is it prog? I'm going to say it is. Is it prog metal still? Hard to say. But the idea that they are blending what are generally diverse aspects of genres together into music that breaks the mold a little bit in many ways in terms of how it is organized and constructed and composed and doing something very different with it, pushing themselves outside of what has come before. That's the very definition of progressive rock, of progressive music. Whether one wants to still call them metal, that's more open for debate, even post-metal. Probably a bit, but I think a little less so this time around. So there's my definitive answer. Yes, they are progressive rock. Progressive metal, TBD. All right, so bracing myself for the comments coming at this one. I know Sleep Token fans are very passionate and very much into their band. I already had some invectives thrown my way over my reaction to Emergence, which really wasn't very negative. It just wasn't very positive either. And the overall album, I think, was well represented by that song. So in total, my reaction to the album is about what it is to that song. But I can say I like it a little bit better than the first time I heard it. Am I totally off base? Am I completely wrong in my interpretations of anything? Did I get anything factually incorrect? Do we undeniably know who the hell Vessel is or not? I'd like to know personally. I'd like to know it conclusively. Do you think I failed to understand the album? And if so, was it because I wasn't super familiar with the previous ones? Let's be constructive with the criticism here. I know it's coming, but we'll see what happens. We'll see how bad it is. I await your comments. Meanwhile, thank you all once again for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry if I rambled long on this one, but in some cases, some albums just seem to demand it from me. Next up, the latest from Norwegian phenoms, Aukrust, coming back with their second album after they debuted with a really great one 2 years ago, and one that gets a little bit overlooked because there were so many great new albums that debuted that year. They were one of the best. I look forward to hearing what they have for us now. Finally, I leave you with the reminder, as always, never fear to deviate from the norm, and of course, keep it proggy.